Hello, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, and welcome to another MediaOps, DevOps.com webinar. So glad you can join us today. I think we've got a great webinar for you that's going to be really helpful and insightful with a great presenter. But before we jump into it, I wanted to just take a moment. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar or maybe need a quick refresher, we're going to go through some housekeeping here on our GoToWebinar control panel, which is what we use on our DevOps.com webinars. First thing I want to point out to you is that for most of you, your GoToWebinar control panel is in your top right-hand corner. What I'm going to ask is that you look at the control panel and pick out the section marked questions. And if you can just kind of click the arrow or caret so it faces downward and expands that section, you'll see it opens up. This is a really great feature of GoToWebinar. You don't have to remember. Someone's already wrote, this would be a question. Yes, Roland, thank you. You don't have to remember your questions and save them for the end. You can write your questions in real time. They're queued chronologically. We can get to them. If for some reason we couldn't get to your question, we have a record of it. We'll write you offline with an answer to your question. We know questions are important to you. You wouldn't ask them otherwise. And answering your questions are important to us as well as our guests and sponsors. So please use the question section to ask questions about the topics or the information in today's webinar. On the other hand, if you have a technical issue and you need chat, if you have a technical issue, like maybe the slides aren't progressing, the audio's not working, something's happening, but you can still get to that chat section, please go in there, type in your issue, and we do have people standing by who will try to fix it for you, or at least try to make this webinar experience the very best it can be for you. And that's really what we aim for here. While we're at it, I will mention that this webinar is being recorded, and the on-demand version, as well as the slides, will be available on DevOps.com shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. It usually takes us a couple hours to get that up there. And then it will be available on demand after that. So with that, I hope you guys have it all. If there's any issues, again, tech support goes in chat. Questions for our presenter go in the question section. With that, now let's turn to our terrific webinar today. I'm really excited with this one. It's brought to us by our friends at Progress, and it's DevOps, the key to differentiation, and it's capturing business value from DevOps, and that's really I want you to focus in on. Our presenter today is from the Progress DataDirect division. His name is Alan Santos. He's Director of Product Management. Alan, you there?
I sure am. Thanks, Alan.
All right, I'm going to ask you to take it away.
Okay, great. So first, thanks everybody for your time and joining us today. Bear with me as I sort of navigate through the GoToWebinar control panels. It's been a while since I've actually used it, but barring any sort of technical difficulties, I think we should be fine. Just my background, I'm a Director of Product Management at Progress DataDirect. DataDirect is a line of business at Progress Software. We're focused on data access and connectivity, really more around the infrastructure side of data management. I'm going to talk mostly about I want to talk about the business of DevOps and how we look at DevOps. I'm going to talk a little bit towards the end about some of our products there, and I'll share an example of some of the work that we've done with our products that really help us sort of capture the value, some of the business value from DevOps, and how we're using it to differentiate a little bit. So I will move on to the first slide. And so I wanted to sort of start. I wanted to start the session taking a big step back and just sort of talking about there's certain changes to business that you can find throughout throughout time, and I think that a really good analogy I thought of when I was thinking about DevOps was sort of the automotive industry, and how back in 1913, right, Ford basically disrupted the entire manufacturing industry by adopting an existing concept of sort of a moving assembly line, right? They adopted it. I mean, assembly lines have been there, but they took it sort of to the next level, and they continued to evolve on that assembly line, the moving assembly line concept over the following days. It was really sort of stunning, the impact that this had across across the globe, right, in all sorts of industries and segments. But at Ford specifically, right, they were able to, by sort of changing the way that they built their product, they were able to reduce the time to build a car from 12 to 2 hours, right? They produced 300,000 cars with 13 people, which was a sort of unheard of at the time, right? For a point of reference, at that time, Ford had, I think, roughly 300 competitors. It included, GM and Chrysler, and they had over 66,000 employees combined for all, for across those 300 different competitors. And Ford was able to outproduce all of them combined, which is a really, really significant number, and helps, I hope, put the scale of the change in perspective. The assembly line in general, right, beyond just sort of Ford and automotive, right, it really did put America at the top of the world industrially, politically as well, right. It enabled not just cheaper products, but it gave better quality for consumers, and and the pay and the lifestyle of the automotive workers at Ford were raised. And virtually every factory across all industries adopted this concept moving forward. Now, I don't want to overstate the benefits of DevOps, right? I'm not suggesting that it's going to make, it's going to, elevate the living status of the world, but I think that there are some very significant benefits, and I think that the type of change that DevOps can bring into an organization is similar, right? It can fundamentally alter the way that you bring product to market, and change the way that you sort of, it can touch every aspect, change every aspect of your business, right? From production to customer service to sales to marketing, everything. And DevOps, I think, is an enabler and an agent of change in much the same way that was.
Alan, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in.
Please.
And I don't know if you realize it, but your analogy here is even more apropos around DevOps, because quite frankly, a lot of what we see in the DevOps world today comes from this assembly line type of thing. And yes, it started with Ford, but if you look at sort of Deming, right? Famous, the whole just-in-time inventory, the whole Toyota kata is their, production methodology, which sort of represents a next generation of what Ford did back in 1913. And it becomes sort of it's the cornerstone of what we think of as lean manufacturing, which then leads to lean IT, right? Lean IT borrows a lot from lean manufacturing, and DevOps really is sort of a combination of a lot of agile and lean IT principles. So what you're talking about here is sort of the direct progenitor of what we see in modern DevOps today.
Yeah, that's a great example of the lineage there, and I appreciate that.
Yep.
It's what may have been, and the work that was done in the 70s and 80s around lean and whatnot in manufacturing, I think is sort of that, an obvious a good evolution of that. And it's interesting. I hadn't really considered it sort of as a direct progenitor of DevOps, but you're absolutely right. Right, the goals, the concepts are all sort of carried forward. Makes a ton of sense.
Yep.
So,
all right.
What I wanted to just call out a couple of quotes here from one Satya Nadella at Microsoft, but also I'll butcher his name, Kosuke
Kosuke Kawagaki, KK.
KK, yeah, right. That's where I was going. Thanks. But I think the point, what I wanted is, like, they're sort of making a similar point here, and is what I wanted to emphasize, right? So when people think of DevOps and building software, traditionally it's sort of, it's focused on software companies, or sort of one small corner of a larger company, like whether it's like Johnson and Johnson, or a financial company, right, or retail. It's just sort of one small piece of it, right? But it really is sort of the thing that's changed, I think, over the past 5 to 10 years, right, is there's recognition that every organization, software is an enabler for every organization, right? And to defend yourself, to differentiate, or to disrupt, right, software has to play a key piece of that is a key piece of that puzzle, right? And so software is sort of fundamental to every company in every industry across the globe. It's not just technology companies at this point, or maybe the other way of looking at it, right, is sort of the way that Satya phrased it, right, is that every company is a software company now, right? So this is sort of fundamental to the way that somebody does business. Maybe not quite at, but close to maybe the level of water, electricity, power. This is fundamentally, software is something that everybody is building to offer, to bring their product and value to market. It's a fundamental piece of that, right? So, we're kind of at the point where software is, or maybe, is begun revolutionizing the world at the same scale as the assembly line. It's not an afterthought, right? It's a fundamental aspect. If you think of, beyond just sort of the technology companies, right? If you look at a company like, restaurants like Chick-fil-A or Starbucks, right? At this point, they're driving over 20% of their revenue from mobile orders, right? That's all driven from software. And to have 20% of their revenue from mobile, right, in the past 5 years has grown or so, in the past 5 years or so, that's a stunning growth, right? It's only going to continue to grow over time. And I think companies will continue to find new ways to bring software into their offerings, into their business. But we're really just at sort of the beginning of that. But I think that there's recognition across across industry that software is an enabler for that sort of change and growth. So, and it's funny, even if you look at, say, some of the, I'll move on to the next slide here if I can get GoToWebinar to cooperate. If you look at the next slide, right, if you think about it, you have banking and payments, you have automotive manufacturing, transportation, lodging, retail. Some of the leaders or some of the new disruptors in those industries, you see Stripe, or you see Square, you see, obviously Tesla and Uber and Airbnb are the obvious ones, Amazon, right? Those are all disruptors, but what are those, when those companies talk about themselves, what do they have in common? And I think that the answer is that they basically refer to themselves, right, as a software company, right? And so Tesla and Uber are sort of notorious for this. Tesla is obviously manufacturing, but if you ask them, or if you ask the guys at Uber, what is it that makes them better than, say, a taxi company or a cab company, right? It's going to be their software. That's what's enabled them, right, to grow. And so it's just sort of an attempt at humor here, right? But it's essentially, it comes back to, it's the software. So software, again, touches every aspect of the business. It doesn't just augment your strategy or your execution, right? When software is done right, it's inseparable from the business. It touches your customer experience, your customer acquisition, customer insight, support, retention. It gives you opportunities for market growth and competitive insight. And at the end of the day, from the software side of it, it allows us to find a better product market fit faster than we could what we get otherwise. So I think, as an example, right, think about, right, where would Uber or Lyft be today, like if the taxi industry was able to build an Uber-like app for yellow cabs, right? Most likely, Uber or Lyft probably wouldn't be there, right? And that's from the software. I mean, there's obviously some additional benefits, right? You're not getting in an old cab, you're getting in nicer cars, but it's the software, right, that really is the cornerstone of their differentiation and value, right, which is basically on demand, getting that vehicle, that transportation to you. And then, sort of similar to that, you can think about how software changes the experience for car owners, right? So Tesla issues updates, right, every few weeks, and they're continuously rolling out improvements for assisted driving, for assisted parking. They're rolling out improvements to range and to performance. And if you think about how all these other automotive companies are going to compete with it, right, you can see that they don't quite seem to get it yet, right? So in a traditional auto companies, right, whether it's Ford, Audi, VW, Toyota, right, they all have electric vehicles, but it's not just getting that engine into the car, right? It's not just the fact that it's an electric engine, right? So using software, right, Tesla really does really sort of nail the user experience, and they're able to continuously deliver value to their software and through their software to their customers in a way that all those sort of traditional automotive manufacturers are not at this point, right? That's all from software. So I wanted to pause, right? Maybe sort of with that sort of context, just sort of talking a little bit about how software is built, and this is where we'll sort of lead up into DevOps. So I've been around for probably 20 years in the software industry, and for me, the biggest shift that I've seen, it's not new languages, it's not not new entrants into the market, it's not new use cases. It's probably not even SaaS. It really is an emphasis on, and the change in sort of building, the emphasis on building and then measuring outcomes, and learning from what's been measured and then iterating and applying those learnings. Now, something like SaaS made this super, super easy. And if you have a background or if you're involved with software that's traditionally packaged, you can do this, of course, but it's really hard to do it because there's a disconnect between everybody building the software and the people that are running the software and people that are actually using the software. Now SaaS makes that loop, right, sort of, it closes that, covers all the gaps, and it makes it sort of a seamless experience. And you could do that with packaged software, but it was really, really hard to do it. But really, as a product guy, the big shift for me has been the emphasis on measuring outcome, right? Learning it and then making sure that you can apply those learnings when you iterate and when you build quickly. And I think, basically, and I think that really, those sort of concepts are really sort of inherent, and part of those sort of the shift is come from, maybe the sort of same background, the same things that drove DevOps are sort of the same things that have driven the changes in product space for me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, shoot.
If you don't mind, I'd like to interject with two questions that we got here. And because before we get further, I don't want them to become irrelevant.
Yep.
So one question was, you spoke about these iconic unicorn-y kind of companies, but what about like software-driven disruption on a smaller scale, right?
Yep.
Maybe even smaller companies where it may not be earth-shattering, right? Like Tesla.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So yeah, for all of us mere mortals, right, who are sort of in what I would say is not a unicorn, right, to use that term, which is a good one. What can we learn and what can we do? I think if you can even, there's an interesting example I thought about, sort of just how software itself can expand in value, and how companies can sort of build on that, right? And so, how about software is the software to augment the user experience and the entire sort of value stream, right? Software can augment the entire value stream and sort of wrap it all up into sort of compress it and sort of give you some ways to measure it. So one example that's really interesting is if you think of 3D modeling and design, right? So designers have always used CAD systems to sort of build out models. But what a lot of some of the newer software companies are doing in that space is they're looking sort of beyond just the design portion of the value chain, right? They're looking at quality, they're looking at modeling, and so physical and environmental modeling, right? And they're incorporating those other areas of product design into the CAD, what are traditionally the CAD systems themselves. So rather than, right, so a designer handing over some work to an environmental engineer or somebody more involved in the physical side of construction, right? They've pulled some of that in, sort of they've shifted to that left, I guess you would say, right, via software to the people who are doing the design. So they're closing that loop. They're making the loop smaller. They're bringing a lot of the work, shifting it left, so to speak, to the designers through software. And that's looks to be pretty disruptive in that space. It's a much smaller example, but there's good lessons, I think, there for everybody who's involved with product, right? To how software can really sort of extend beyond just a sort of the solving a point solution.
Excellent. I've got one other quick question from the audience that I want to do because it's a good one too, and it's kind of in this vein, asking you to speak on behalf of the company, on behalf of Progress. But audience asks, Ford's primary reason for assembly line manufacturing was to reduce cost both in production and to reduce costs to the consumer, right? What are the primary means through which this is accomplished through Progress's point of view to accomplish both in DevOps?
So that's a great question. I hope I'm gonna cover that in some of the
Great.
slides.
Okay.
But I can summarize it really quick, and I can talk. So I'll use this as an excuse to talk a little bit about the product that we have. Um, I think so Progress is in data infrastructure and connectivity, right? We have a number of different products, but our biggest product line are our connectors. And what our connectors do is that they sort of take away all the variation. They help reduce the variation between when you have to connect to all sorts of different data sources. Now, if you think about what you as if you're a developer, for example, that means that you no longer have to worry about managing a whole bunch of different databases, or how the various differences between when connecting to a bunch of different databases. If you are a software vendor, right, connectivity is probably a critical piece of your solution, right? Being able to have your system connect with all those other systems. And you basically would use our software to sort of take that work that's not core to your business, but critical or important to your business, take that off of your plate and let you focus on the areas in which your value is primarily focused. And so what I'll specifically talk to a little bit later on is some examples of the products that we have that are focused on DevOps systems, and some examples of how we've used DevOps and information in DevOps to sort of help build and guide our own product direction.
Fantastic.
Okay. So anything else? Is that it for now?
Well, someone suggested a really great paper on topic, but I've chatted that out to our audience, and we've got a lot to cover. So.
Great. Okay. Cool. I'll keep moving. All right. So sort of getting back to where we were, right? So business, right? DevOps is essentially offers us a closed loop with the opportunity to learn and improve in each of those iterations, right? So and it's a critical aspect, I think, of anybody. It's a best practice, right? I think anybody who's really invested in software and appreciates what software can do for a business, they're probably using DevOps or something, or maybe they're not calling it DevOps, but hopefully they're using something that looks like DevOps with the right goals and process and similar processes and opportunities for learning right throughout. So but for me, from the product perspective, right, the iteration of DevOps, I think, is the key piece, right? So in the previous slide, right, I showed sort of software development as a pipeline. Really, as a product guy, DevOps for me is a huge opportunity for us to learn, to sort of learn, to measure, to learn, to adjust, and to reduce the risk and cost overall moving forward, right? So it's the cyclical nature of it, as well as sort of capturing metrics and being willing to learn from those and bring those learnings back to the start of the cycle. That's the critical piece for me. And if I think about what that is, right? So let's take a little bit for a second, because learning, I think, as a product person, learning is the most important part for me for DevOps, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what we would be learning, right? So the point of the DevOps cycle, I think, is not to do more faster, right? But to continuously learn, to apply what we've learned, right? And everybody working in software, whether they're a commercial product or project, right? Hopefully they're asking themselves continuously, how well are we performing in each of these steps, right? Have we built what people need? Has it been built with quality? Are we building more efficiently? Do the customers enjoy the experience that we've paid for, right? And you can ask yourself at each stage of this sort of this cycle, you could look for answers to those questions, right? And if you take the time to study the data, right, you can find questions maybe that you might get questions raised that you hadn't been asking for, which is an important point, right, to sort of help you cover those unknown unknowns. Right, so DevOps traditionally, I think, is of interest to the technology teams, but I think if you look at DevOps as a way to build software, and it's fundamentally an opportunity to affect and influence the entire business, right? So what I've sort of over my career tried to internalize, right, is that you become what you measure. And measuring the DevOps of an enabled product team without necessarily taking into consideration how that product or technology influences and interacts with the rest of the business leaves us can leave you in sort of an interesting position, not really a good position, right? Where DevOps might just be seen as another technical discussion or another concern localized to IT. So my assertion is that DevOps and the adoption of DevOps practices should not stop at the technical boundaries of product and software teams, right? And and you should figure out, you should be thinking about how DevOps can interact, influence, and learn from the rest of your business. With DevOps, you shouldn't just be answering the question, are we building something the right way? I think you should also be asking yourself if we're building the right thing in the right way, and probably are we building the right thing at the right way at the right time? And to get answers to all those other questions, right, you need to be aware of and understand the context of the software that you're building in the entire organization. So I wanted to sort of, just with regard to sort of asking the right questions, I thought it would be, I'd sort of shown some slides, right, of the unicorns previously, right? So I thought it would be a good example. Nokia, I thought was an interesting example of sort of maybe not asking the right questions, because asking the right questions and getting the right getting answers for those is really a critical piece, I think, of DevOps, but the entire business as well. So there's this really great presentation from a guy named Dr. McKirsten. And he was given a presentation on the flow framework, and he had a story that I'll share about Nokia, right? So they were trying to transform in the early 2000s, and Nokia knew that Apple was going to release a new phone, and that they knew that to compete, they had to innovate with software, right? And so phones weren't just about the hardware. They knew this, right? And they were right. And so they recognized that they needed to innovate in software. But what they didn't do, I don't think what they did wrong, was I don't think that they were asking the right questions. They definitely were not measuring the right things. They spent a huge amount of time optimizing the value stream to make sure that they were able to deliver more and faster, but they were exceptionally, maybe exclusively focused on processes and teams, and didn't necessarily think about the customers, and didn't think about measuring and asking the right questions about the customers, or areas that were sort of outside their sort of well understood and defined scope, right? So it wasn't necessarily about how can we, they weren't necessarily asking, are we building the right thing? They were asking, are we building it the right way? Absolutely, but they were only asking, are we building the right thing? And it sort of gave them sort of, I think, they over optimized on that. And it was interesting, right? Because if you listen to the discussion, they over optimized on how they build things. And it actually ended up being sort of a net negative overall. But I think the more important lesson that I took from that conversation is that they weren't asking necessarily the right questions, or they didn't have the right people asking the right questions, I would say. I'm sure there were plenty of people that recognized they weren't, that they were overly focused on processes. But as an organization, the technology and the business just didn't seem to be lined up. So there's a good opportunity for a poll?
Yes, Alan, I was waiting on you. Thank you. All right, our first poll question today. And guys, poll questions really make it interactive and give the presenter a chance to understand what it is we're doing. And so I ask you, please, these are easy multiple choice. It's going to take a second. Please answer them. Let's try to get at least 2/3 of you. It's a decent amount of people here. So what are your primary DevOps challenges? And select just one of the following: flow, efficiency, quality, visibility and tools, or all of the above. Come on, guys, we've only got maybe a third of you have voted, and I don't want to waste a lot of time, but take a moment, vote. We're getting there. Almost half of you have voted already.
Unfortunately, my vote doesn't appear to count, Alan. I would try to.
Every vote counts, Alan. Every vote counts. But we're going to close things off here in about 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we got about 2/3 of you voting, and let's see what the responses are. And share results. Here we are. All right, Alan. Here are our answers. So the big winner was all of the above, with over, almost 40%, 37%. And then beyond that, it was pretty close between efficiency, quality, visibility, and tools, edged out the middle two. And then flow came in last at 12%. Expected what you expected, or
Yeah, honestly, I expected all of the above. It's actually a
yeah,
little bit lower than I would have expected.
really?
Yeah,
Okay. Why do you think flow kind of trailed the other three?
that's a great question. And honestly, Alan, I was going to ask you that.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's the one that jumps out to me. Um, I just think when we, not that flow is important, but I think sometimes flow becomes secondary. And this
Mhm.
and this asks for primary DevOps challenges. And quite frankly, visibility in tools is a primary challenge. Quality, I mean, it's the whole reason why we want to do DevOps and efficiency, in the DevOps equation of going faster makes better quality. Efficiency is innately bound into that. Where flow, I think, is a secondary sort of uh, characteristic of DevOps. But hey, that's just my opinion.
Yep.
Anyway, thanks everyone for participating in the poll. We do have a few other poll questions as we move along here. But Alan, we are halfway through our time, and I want to give you your chance to talk.
Okay, thanks. See if I can get things moving again on my end. All right. So for me, right, being able to measure things and to apply those learnings, I think is a huge priority in my job and my team's job. And so fundamentally, the question is, how do you measure the right things? What are some of the challenges, the dead ends to avoid? How do you know that you're asking the right questions? So like I mentioned, right, I've been managing products, business, technology, customers like 20 years or so, longer than I want to admit at this point. And eventually, you whether you mean to or not, you develop some instinct. But instinct doesn't really scale. It's not reliable. And really, what's more important for me is if you rely solely on instinct, then it's hard to learn new things because all you're doing is leaning on what you already know. So for me, just sort of understanding and having some instinct and some experience there isn't sufficient. Um, and so it's really important for me to be able to measure things, right? And so most teams that have adopted sort of DevOps or something like a DevOps process looks like a DevOps process, they're going to have these, excuse me, systems of record with data that's going to give you the answers. It's going to have the answers that you need. And with some consideration and some analysis, coupled maybe with some experience, you're hopefully going to be able to uncover some of those unknown unknowns by understanding the data. But the thing that's interesting, right, is that as part of the DevOps process, you probably have these tools that you're not thinking about, right? They're really going to give you you should be looking to for measurements to be able to understand your team. Now, and so my background, one of my areas of background is in data, and obviously that's the background for the company that I'm working with. So I'm going to focus on data, but I do think that it's really important, right? And if you think about what AHA is, and Jira and GitHub or TeamCity, those are systems of record that will allow you to sort of, like GitHub's a great example, right? Its primary focus is a repository, but it's a great source of team and information, right? And there are analytics that can be, and insight that through analytics, there's insight that can be gleaned from those systems of record with the data in them, right? So whether it's AHA or Jira, right, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of metadata, and there's a lot of data that's really sort of descriptive and helpful to understand that should be measured as part of your DevOps process. It's funny. So my background, right, is in databases and historically, right, people think about a database and it's this horizontal technology that stores all this information, and people really value the information that's stored in those systems of record. And they've owned those. But what the rise of services has really sort of, it's interesting from a data management perspective. That's the same critical business critical, team critical information that you would traditionally keep in your own data warehouses, your own data stores. It's kind of siloed, right, and locked behind all of these services, which is a really interesting challenge. But ultimately, the data that's in those systems I like to think of it as an oil field and it is just really just a huge amount of value that's just sitting there in those systems that you're using to build and deploy the software, deploy and operate the software that your business runs on today. So, what are a lot of people doing? Well, and all those tools have really great dashboards and really great user interfaces, and they have great teams and really talented people putting it together, and I use each of these things every day. But they're very, very good at reporting on their own metrics, right? You get up-to-date information. For the most of the part, it's easily absorbed. There are a few exceptions here and there, and every tool has its quirks. But they have really good user interfaces. It's necessary to have a good UI as part of a service, right? But if you're somebody like me who has to, or if you have to worry, if you want to measure what the entire DevOps process and all the teams that are there, right? You have to reconcile all this information, and it is a huge, huge time sink. And it's not only that, more importantly, right? It's unreliable. All these systems, they each have a slightly different perspective or context or take, and it's because they're just focused on different areas, right? They measure things in different units, and it's kind of like the story of the 5 blind men who are feeling an elephant. They each show you they each give you insight into a little piece of your entire DevOps pipeline. And you don't really have a good way for the entire context that's shared between them, because they're all point solutions. So, and likewise, in addition to sort of the context piece, the other piece that's really critical that might not be obvious is if you're measuring these things, the productivity of your team, or the value of a particular feature, or the uptime of a certain service, right? You don't know, if you're just looking at a point dashboard, you don't know the impact downstream or back upstream, right, to all those other systems. And so you have to keep that all internalized. You have to make sure that everybody's aware of it. And obviously things like that fall through the cracks. But it's just the impact is just as important as a missing piece, right? Because you don't have that shared context of information. And so I would say that if data is, these are traditionally refer to these as data silos, right? And if your systems of record the DevOps systems of record are an oil field, then the challenge here, right, is actually in extracting and refining it into something useful. So some of those services will have integrations. They definitely don't. I can guarantee you that they don't have an integration for everything else and everything else that you're using. So, for example, we use AHA internally. It's a great tool for a product management team. If I have a feature there, it's tied to an initiative, and the initiative is dependent upon some operational concern. There's no way for me to sort of tie back the feature, the initiative, and how well we're moving forward in that initiative with the operational data that's captured from something like Datadog or Sumo Logic, right? So, but this is critical for me as a product manager. I need to understand, the impact of our operational concerns on our internal initiatives, or other things, right? So ultimately, with all these silos, you have no consistent end-to-end visibility or understanding of impact, right? And I've got I have 10 different and incomplete views of my DevOps pipeline here. And if you think about, whoops, did I go too far? No. And if you think about what I was saying earlier, right, and how critical DevOps is to the business and how it needs to be appreciated and consider everything else in the business, it gets even worse, right? So you don't have 10 systems of record. You probably have 20, 30 systems of record, right? So if I want to look at customer support issues, right, how does that same operational data that I mentioned, how does that tie into an individual customer experience? Right? If my sales teams need to worry about a renewal, right, would it be helpful for them to understand which new features my customers are using, right? Which ones they're fully taking advantage of? How frequently do they use the system? Or are they not using any of this, right? And so there's an operational aspect of that needs to tie into my CRM data as well, right? If I want to have a new feature that's going to roll out, and I want to correlate that with some A/B testing or some market initiatives, right? How can I do that with my deployment stage, right? How can I tie that into some of my marketing systems like HubSpot, right? Or some of my some AdSense campaigns that I have running, right? And so if I want the software to run the business, I can't just think of the software and the systems that are building the software and deploying it and monitoring it alone. I have to think about all the other systems that are critical for the business that are influenced and influence the software that I'm building it, right? So the oil field, right, is kind of exponentially larger than sort of you might think at a first glance. But the reality is that extracting the oil and refining it is much harder. But there's a lot more opportunity there, really. And if you want to operate like a Tesla or an Uber or something like that, right? All of those systems of record need to be you need to be aware of all those other parts of the business, right? And the systems that are running those parts of the business. And you can incorporate information that's captured from your DevOps pipeline and disseminate it throughout the entire organization. And you can pull that all back into your DevOps pipeline as well. So, maybe just this was maybe a good opportunity for another poll if we want to do that. Just as a sort of a quick poll here to help understand how many tools and platforms do you have included into your overall value stream, right? And so it's interesting when you stop to think about it, right? So I can think of at least 10 at Progress, and we're your typical mid-size enterprise public company, right? So we could if we wanted to run a poll.
Sure, here we go. I'm sorry, guys.
Yep.
Our next poll question, and again, these polls questions, guys, are only as good as people who answered it. We had some people who, in the question box said, well, if I answered it, this is what I would have picked. Well, here's your chance to answer. Don't wait till after and say, I wish I would have. Our next question is, how many tools and platforms are included in your value streams presently? Select 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, or 16 or more. And again, this time everybody's answering quickly. I appreciate it. We're over half. Let's give you another 5 seconds here, and we'll call it a day. 5, 4. Come on, we slowed down a little bit. Get your answers in here. 3, 2, 1. All right. It's the same amount of people who voted last time. Some things can't be helped. Here's share results. Our answers are: how many tools and platforms are included in your value stream? Well, the most popular by far was 6 to 10. 1 to 5 was at 23%, and then as you go up, the percentage went down. Alan, I don't know. That's kind of what I would expect too. I think 6 to 10.
I think it's going to vary across different types of companies, right? Like a company like Johnson & Johnson, right? It's clearly a 16 or more. Your typical company, I think on the development side, it's interesting. I kind of expected 11 to 15 to be the actual one. If I think about just like my teams alone, my development teams alone, I have 6 to 10 systems of record, right? But if I think about the entire value stream, if I think of sales, I think of marketing, I think of a finance and accounting teams, it's easily over 16. And we're
Sure.
not a huge company.
I think if people really think about all of the tools and platforms, you get to over 6 to 10 pretty quickly, actually. But I think a lot of people just look just at their team, Alan, and not across the whole enterprise.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, not everybody's involved in every aspect.
Well,
it makes a ton of sense.
Realize what another team is using, right?
Exactly.
6 to 10. That team uses 6 to 10. We're pretty quickly up to 20, right? And so it happens. Anyway, let's continue on here. We're almost at a quarter, 45 minutes past the hour. And
okay, good. I think we're on track.
Perfect.
Okay, so the assertion, right, is that and this is where I can talk a little bit about Progress, a little bit more about Progress. Is that companies need on-demand access to their development and operational value streams, right? If you want to be a company, right, that can respond to the unicorns that we mentioned earlier, that you want to avoid disruption from some smaller startup, or you want to just really sort of grow and improve your own adoption and presence in the market and customer experience, right? You want on-demand access to your value streams, right? The information that's in that oil field that's sort of being built out as you build out software and grow and market and sell and everything else around it, right? All of those systems that are part of the value stream. You want information about your teams, your process, ideas, production, quality, and operations, right? Those are the things that that help you ask the right questions, make sure you get answers for those, and really sort of, I think, succeed as a product team. And so Progress is no different. We experience the same kind of challenges as everybody else, right? We have different systems of record. We have different teams, different priorities, different schedules, you know, and it still sort of rolls up to the same people, and they have the same challenges that everybody else does, sort of gathering, understanding that information, right? Capturing it, you know, understanding it, organizing it, presenting it, analyzing it. You know, fortunately, we're in a good position to be able to solve that for ourselves. And I can talk a little bit about how we've done that. So first, I touched on this earlier, right? So, you know, we have a line of products that gives you standards-based connectivity to virtually any data source. For me, one of the appeals to coming to Progress was it's really sort of it's interesting technology, but it's also really sort of an interesting business. It's a little bit unusual, but technically speaking, we offer connectors, JDBC, ODBC drivers, things like that allow you to connect to relational and non-relational data sources. So it could be something like, you know, ODBC, JDBC to certain versions of Postgres that might do more or perform faster than an open source connector to Postgres. But we also give you sort of standards-based access to things like MongoDB or other non-relational sources, and also to sort of API-oriented services, right? So where all that critical data is sort of locked behind services that you might not have sort of that are traditionally kept on premise, like all that customer or team data, performance data, right? So why do you care about, you know, ODBC, JDBC, or other standards if, you know, those things offer an API? So a whole bunch of different reasons, but in this case specifically, right? One of the reasons is, you know, JDBC and ODBC are a standard way to quickly integrate your data source into any reporting tool like Power BI, Tableau, or Jaspersoft, right? You can't necessarily do that with something like, you know, GitHub, right? You don't have the metric, you can't get the data and sort of analyze it, incorporate it into dashboards easily without somebody spending some time writing, maintaining, and support it, which is again not your core business. And you know, so connectivity to, you know, analytics and reporting tools is one of the more common use cases that we have. And so we have connectors for Jira, for TeamCity, AHA, GitHub. We have back office connectors for S4HANA, HubSpot, Salesforce. You know, we have a number of different connectors that are coming out in the CRM and MarTech space. And again, those are all those systems of record that you want to be able to pull information out of, to analyze, and to feed back into your DevOps streams. So what did we do with all that? So we basically built a unified cross-enterprise dashboard. And this is sort of a screenshot of one of those dashboards that we built in Tableau using some of our connectors. And I can talk a little bit about some of the insight they've offered for our products and teams. So these dashboards, they give us current, up-to-date, accurate, and consistent information, you know, that spans all of those silos. It's been normalized. We understand the impact and the relationships between the data. And with that information, right, we have what we need to make timely decisions on what we're delivering. We can adapt to it, you know, in real time if we wanted to. We use the dashboards to report on the performance of the organization. We understand and report on the performance of the product to our C-level and to our senior staff. We use data from our DevOps pipeline. We combine that with our CRM and back office systems to help measure predictability over time. We bring it together, tying, you know, execution data along with our planning into our planning cycles, and we align those with sales and marketing data that we can also pull in. And you know, one of the more immediate benefits that we had was understanding the predictability of our team's velocity, the capacity and consistency, right? And so if I think about it as a product manager, if I don't have predictability into my teams, if I don't understand what that looks like, then I can't coordinate, you know, across the organization with our marketing teams, or I can't coordinate with, you know, I need to coordinate certain customer commitments with certain events for, you know, our sales teams. You know, other areas that we're looking at, right? We need to understand our delivery time for the stories and epics to see how effective we are in planning, right? How do each of our teams compare with each other? Are there opportunities for us to share people or best practices across those teams to drive improvement across the organization? We have all that information. It's just sort of locked away in those silos that are sort of, you know, the DevOps tools that are being used elsewhere, right? We look at resolution, time to bugs, compare the time for internal bugs versus getting fixes for internal bugs versus customer reported bugs. How's the rate of incoming bugs affect and impact our engineering velocity? And this includes not just our traditional DevOps systems, we also tie it in with our customer support and services as well. One of the more interesting things that I thought about was Progress does a lot of internal polling, and we have a lot of, we like to sort of we do a lot of polling to understand team sentiment. And we've incorporated team sentiment into that, right? And so we can look and see how the teams are feeling with regard to, what they're working on. Do they feel like they have enough, opportunities to work on what they want to work on? And we correlate that with, with team sentiment, which I thought was with the delivery time and velocity, bug fixes, and all those things to understand the performance, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't seen that before. But essentially, all of this gives our non-technical and executive staff sort of a 360-degree view of our product lines and the teams and the people that are building those. We use it to measure against KPIs, establish baselines across all of our organizations. So for my team, though, this gives me, the data to help us make decisions. Should we be launching this feature at this point in time? How's it going to influence, or how do we think it's going to be received by our largest customers? Does our A/B testing relate to various teams or customer sentiment? Is there risk associated with a certain customer, either from a products perspective, from a roadmap perspective, or from a sales perspective, right? We tie all that information in with the processes, the DevOps processes that we're using to build the software, right? So I have my customer data augmented with the team's data, with the product data, right, to understand what sort of value, and I can look and understand what value we're delivering to different customers at different times. So sort of to wrap it up, right, how does all that information sort of lead to differentiation, to tie it back, right? So it gives us access, right, to new sources of information that helps us uncover new market opportunities. If I look at, the market that DataDirect is in, right, where data access and connectivity, I can understand and look at how how frequently people are using our tools, what they're connecting with, to find new and adjacent markets to go explore, right? I can understand what they're doing. I can uncover new personas, new customers, if I understand the people, if I can figure out and understand who's using the software and track and track that. Which people at which of our customers, what are their titles and roles that are most frequently using some of the software, and I can incorporate that back into the DevOps planning, some of the planning phases. I can align the business and I can align the technology, right? This piece is critical, right? If you want to avoid becoming the next Nokia, right, it's critical to have that alignment and make sure that, all of these systems, you're not just looking at team processes, but you're looking at everything, all the data that you have, which includes your customer data, your sales support, and other market data that you might be pulling in and working with. You'd be able to answer critical questions, right, to measure the impact of the software on your business, KPIs for teams, et cetera. And then you can use the data, I think, for me on the product teams, one of the more important things is to understand and drive the roadmap, right? Know what, when, at what cost to deliver features and software for sort of what purpose. So that's a little bit about how we're using the data that's generated during DevOps at Progress to help us understand and differentiate and sort of drive our product forward. I guess we can kind of close out with a last poll here, right? Which is sort of is there anybody, what's the sort of level in your organization in requesting analytics or asking about information about your DevOps teams, right? And if it's the C-level staff, the VP of product or director, or is it basically, nobody's really doing it, which is maybe we just built. So Alan, if you're able to sort of throw up the poll.
I'm ready.
Awesome.
Yep, just was waiting on you to finish speaking.
Guys,
this is our last poll question of the day. So let's finish strong. What is the highest level in your organization requesting DevOps analytics? Is it coming from the C-level? Maybe slightly below the C-level, again, depending on your organization, SVP product, engineering director or manager, or maybe from the bottom up, middle down, we just build. Hopefully it's coming from one of those. I guess, Alan, we didn't put it in a place somewhere else or nowhere at all. But
I think that's sort of I think that we just build is we're not asking for it.
Right.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I mean, I think that's sort of the default, right? And I think you're really missing an opportunity for DevOps to enrich your business. I mean, you need, like, one of the critical pieces for me at DevOps, right, is really just sort of measuring and learning and iterating. And if you don't have these analytics, right, if you're not looking at the data that's collected, that's sort of a byproduct of your processes and teams, then I don't know that you're able to answer some of those questions, and I don't think that you're really able to sort of gain all the benefits of DevOps that that in theory that you could achieve.
Absolutely. Here are our sponsors, Alan. So the winner was engineering director. Or see, I thought it would be We Just Built, to tell you the truth, but it's engineering director or manager.
Yeah,
by a lot.
I have a strong suspicion that this differs, and the maturity of the company, the type of the company, whether you're like a technology company or your manufacturing company or a retail company, there's going to be they're going to have distinct groupings. Is my suspicion.
I agree.
Yeah.
Good
Okay,
stuff.
so
All right,
yeah.
let me close that.
Okay, so the last slide I've got is really just one last pitch for our software, right? So I talked about our connectors and access to all those systems to get the information out quickly and easily and into maybe analytics tools or your data warehouses if you want to if you're building something like that, right? So direct to enterprise, right? If you're an end user, right, will give you the access and insight into the development operational value stream in a really easy to use manner, right? You don't have to worry about learning 50 different APIs. You don't have to worry about versioning. If you have somebody who's familiar with SQL, you have access to all those systems. So that's great for like a business analyst as opposed to a developer, right? In terms of performance, right? There's obviously the speeds and feeds which we pride ourselves on. But like the other class of users, I think that are important for us, right? Super important for us are the independent software vendors. If you're a software vendor, right? If you have some product that needs to integrate with other products, if you're building enterprise software, very likely you want to be integrating with all those other products. Again, right, integration is the ability to integrate may be core to your value, but integrating with all those point systems is not core to your value, right? That's where we can come in and we can help out with either the connectors that we have built, or we can build custom connectors for you. We have customers who are database vendors and we'll build connectors for them likewise, right? So again, right, if you're an ISV, right, not only is the technology important, but we have, a huge focus on security, customer level support, right? ISVs and OEMs are basically drive our business. And for us, customer support is as critical or even more so than the technology itself. And that's the last pitch I've got, Alan. I think if we wanted to, we could probably open for questions.
So, Alan, if it's okay.
Absolutely.
Few more questions here, just one or two. The first one is, you spoke a lot about reporting and analytics with DevOps source data. What else might you do with that?
Sure. So I think reporting is the obvious one for me, but I think really the interesting opportunity that and I'm not sure, like my team certainly aren't ready for this yet, and I don't know if any others are, right? But I have no doubt that some are. But if you think about what I was describing in that learning process, there's still opportunities, I think, to automate, right? And so a lot of the analysis, the data is all generated as a byproduct of your team's activities, right? And the user and your users using the software and deployment, right? There's a ton of that data. Right now where we are, right, I and my team look at the data and we do a lot of the analysis ourselves, right? And we will manually go and adjust plans or make decisions based off of that. I think the next logical step of that is sort of feeding that data back into through, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I know that AI is such a buzzword, right? But what learning can we automate? And what further, systems are we able to automate? What parts of our sort of, DevOps process can we further automate by pulling other information back in, right? So rather than, again, it's an opportunity to sort of, take the person out of low value decision making. Anytime a person is sort of in a position where it's just sort of low value decision making, that's things that are easily automatable or understandable through, straightforward algorithms, can we start feeding that information back in to influence the things that we're building and the decisions that we're making, and sort of, again, sort of simplifying the decision-making process or augmenting the decision-making process for a human. So not just sort of doing the visualization and manual analysis, but really figuring out how that information can feed back into the loop to sort of influence, right, better influence the outcomes without sort of having a human in the process. I think that's sort of an interesting area to explore.
Excellent. Alan, we're bumping up on the top of the hour. First of all, thank you for a fantastic webinar. I think it was great. I think our audience enjoyed it. I do want to quickly mention, as usual, we are giving out 4 Amazon gift cards to audience members, and our 4 winners today are Adrian L, Kevin D, Troy D, and Sharon O. Our team here at MediaOps will reach out to you and with email with information to get your gift card over to you. There was a late question from someone from the audience, but we're not really going to have time. Alan, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining us on this DevOps.com webinar. Hope to see you soon on our next MediaOps webinar.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you everybody for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, everyone. See you soon.